Cheers, Cyrus.
All right, gentlemen. The honest drink.
It's so awesome to see you again.
It's funny. We were just saying that, we happen to have a lot of guests previously, now including you, that's either on their way to the airport to leave China,
right,
or just arriving and coming straight to our studio.
Yeah.
It's not the first time. It's been a couple of guests now, right?
Okay, well, let's give the listeners a little bit of context. Cyrus, you literally just came straight from the airport, from Pudong Airport.
I did.
You brought your luggage with you.
I love it.
This is literally your first stop arriving in China.
Absolutely. I mean, it's an honor that you guys reached out, and I had such a great conversation with you. And I just love what you guys are doing, and and I knew where you were. I knew the studio, and just let's sit down, have a glass of whiskey, let's have a nice chat, a nice conversation. And the long form content is great because I know a lot of my viewers on YouTube they enjoy these long podcasts as well. And I think what's just really fun is, this is really serendipitous for me to come back to China right now. It's been a long time in the making. I've worked very hard to make this trip possible, and I'm just so excited because this is really the city that I really grew up in. I always say that I came to Shanghai as a boy at age 23, and at age 30, I left as a man. I spent 7 years in Shanghai, and I grew up here. This is really where I grew up in Florida. But for me, this was my first big job after university. This is where I bought my first house. This is where I met my wife. A lot of my big accomplishments in life and kind of what got me started in my life all came from Shanghai.
Yeah.
The moment you walked in the door, we can like Howie and I could feel your energy already. We can tell you're really excited to be back.
I'm so excited.
We don't know if it's just because you got off the plane. You're still running that adrenaline from traveling.
I tell you, the adrenaline's gonna be running the whole time I'm here because it's just what's difficult is you have that 10-year multiple entry visa as American citizens, and so I'm trying to get back to China, and then of course the whole world changed. Right, the whole world changed in March, in early 2020, and immediately, all of a sudden, China's cut off, and we can't get back to China, and it's kind of cut off from the world. And I think that's when you look at China's history, in times of when it has been cut off from the world, that's when China doesn't do good. And same thing. If we have a lot of Americans and Westerners that are not understanding China, having the border closed is not a good thing, right? No. We need people coming here, experiencing it. And so, March 15th, 2023, when the Chinese government said, hey, we're reinstating all the visas, you guys are free to come, all the COVID restrictions are done. That was like Christmas. I was like, wow, this is great. I'm gonna, as soon as that happened, I was like, all right, let's put the wheels in motion. And here we are 3 months later, June 2023. We're in Shanghai, and we're here on the podcast.
Wait, so where are you based in Canada or in the States?
So I'm based in the States now.
Oh, you're based in the States.
Yeah,
whereabouts in the States?
So I was for 5 years in Vancouver, Canada, and then last summer we relocated to Las Vegas.
Oh,
so full-time Las Vegas now.
Nice. How's Vegas now?
Vegas is good. Vegas is great. We really enjoy it. I like the weather a lot better. Vancouver's a lovely spot, but
it's cold, right?
Yeah, it's cold and raining. It just rains.
Like Seattle kind of thing.
Yeah, it rains 9 months out of the year. Mm-hmm. So we relocated to sunny Vegas, and it's been good.
Wow. Yeah. So we have a lot to catch up on.
Absolutely.
All right. So what's the deal with you in China? Like, what's the mission for this trip for you?
So basically, I'm kind of here for about 6-7 days. Basically about a week. I'm going to visit 4 cities. It's going to be very action packed. It's going to be very hectic, the schedule. But when you have this kind of energy, I'm just like, hey, we got to tell this story. And I think my main mission is really the Western world is so disconnected with what China is today in 2023. And again, it goes back to that 3 years of not being able to visit here. I think people's perception of China has just gotten worse and worse and worse. My neighbor, bless his heart, he's an older gentleman, probably around 70, and he said, "Oh, you're going to China? Like, do you have enough social credit scores to go there?" I'm like, wow.
You really said that to you?
I swear. I'm like, wow. I'm like, well, the social credit, it's interesting. It actually applies more to like companies as opposed to individuals. And he's like, oh, I thought it's like if you jaywalk in the middle of the street, the camera's going to sense you and be like, minus 100. And now you can't. Now
a lot of people believe that.
Yeah. So and I'm like, no, it really doesn't work like that at all. It's just very different. But that was his perception. And and again, it's just.
And this was in Vegas.
This was in Vegas.
Okay.
This was in Vegas. And again, I don't blame him because I think in America, we just we kind of have that American exceptionalism where we don't really, let's be honest, I bet you most people don't know anything about Canada, right? I lived for 5 years in Canada, and I mean, I had a very close friend of mine when he said, "Hey, so what kind of currency do they use up there? I mean, U.S. dollar?" I'm like, no,
Wow.
no, it's Canadian dollar.
So it's like a general, like, lack of a better word, ignorance kind of.
I mean, you hate to stereotype. I mean, but I mean, it's just I've experienced it. You know, it is very true. So you know, that is the kind of the double-edged sword I think of America. I mean, it's a great place. It's very beautiful. You know, and you can kind of get whatever you want, right? If you want desert, if you want mountains, if you want beach, whatever you want in the world, you can kind of find that in America.
Beautiful country.
It is, you know, and so a lot of Americans don't tend to travel as much, and so you know they don't really have a good perception of what's going on in that world, and so that's the issue is when, and that's kind of been a fun thing for me going back to America and living there. I'm very happy to be back because I can basically sit down and almost reason with anybody on the political spectrum, whether you're far left or far right, and say like, hey, I used to live in China for 10 years. And initially there, you know, it's like, oh, you know, I've had people say, oh, wow, did you have to give up your American citizen? Are you Chinese now? I'm like, no, I just got a work permit. Like I'm still American citizen. But they would, now all of a sudden China became a little bit more real to them because like, oh, I know Cyrus and used to live there for 10 years. Let me ask you some questions.
There's like a contact point.
It's a contact point, right?
Yeah.
You know, because like, for example, if you say like, what's Bangladesh like? I have no idea what Bangladesh is like. I have no connections. I don't know anybody from there. I don't know anybody that's traveled there. To me, I don't really know anything about it. Now, unfortunately, that's for most, I think, foreigners and Westerners, you know, but China is a much more important country, right? It's a huge role in our global economy and our society. So, you know, everyone kind of hears about China. It's constantly in the news. Every single day it's in the news in America. So that's why it's a little bit more, you know, people are always talking about China, but yet they don't have a contact point. They have no experience with that at all. And so I think it's been great for me to be back because I really do enjoy chatting with people and saying like, well, let me tell you, I used to live there for 10 years. You know, I speak Chinese. I've studied the language, the culture. I've spent a lot of time with Chinese people. Yeah, it's probably a lot different than what you think. And let me just share with you some things.
How long have you been back in the States now for?
So I moved back to Canada in 2017. And I lived 5 years there. So, you know, this is like year 6.
And what about in America?
Just coming up on a year.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to get at is because based off of your content, which I think I can speak for both Justin and I, like we were fans of your show.
Yeah.
You know, you do great stuff. And one thing that I personally like to say whenever I speak about your show is that I do feel like you're not biased. Like you're trying to present facts, you're trying to present some anecdotes, but at the same time, it's like, look, that's what it is. You know, like you take what you want from it. I'm not trying to like convince you anything, right?
Yeah.
That's what I feel, right?
Nice.
What I think is great.
That's great.
And so I'm curious because now that you're back in America and you've been away from China for so long and you had this message of building this bridge between the two countries. I mean, is it like this really uphill battle that you're facing every day? I'm just so curious what it's like.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, Howie. I mean, I think, you know, the interesting thing is when I started my YouTube channel 3 years ago, my goal was like, I really want to be a positive force and I want to build this bridge. I really want to be a great ambassador for U.S.-China relations. That's the goal, and that still is the vision. That still is the goal. But what I will say is that, you know, I mean, we've kind of seen the opposite, right? U.S.-China relations. If we go back from where we were 3 years ago to now, I don't think you've seen an improvement. I think you've seen
just the opposite.
You've seen just the opposite, to be honest. So, but what I think I've been able to, you know, what I feel is I have so many great fans and so many great comments, and people really like that message of, you know, learning to work together. And the kind of common message that I've always had on the channel is always, if the U.S. and China learn to work together, the entire world wins. And that's really the cornerstone of the content. That's the cornerstone of, you know, my, you know, whole philosophy and belief behind, you know, the work that I'm doing. And it's just more providing that nuance and providing that perspective. And it's just simple things, you know, where, you know, for example, I looked at, I was, you know, reading today that France, you know, they came out and said, you know, we do not support an office of NATO in Japan. You know, that we do not think that that's going to be helpful for the situation in Asia and kind of the world. And, you know, that's the second time in the last couple of months, you know, probably the last month or so, that France has come out and said things that have been a little bit against the United States. And so, sometimes people will criticize me and say, well, why are you sharing that? Or why, you're only promoting that because it's anti-American. I'm like, no, it's actually context that we need, though, because when Macron came out and said France should not put itself in a situation where it's between U.S. and China over Taiwan. We do not need to get ourselves involved in that situation. And I was just simply, it's the president of France. It's not my opinion. It's just, I'm reporting on, hey, this is what the president of France has said, and there's a lot of context behind that. And on the flip side, in America, we had all of these politicians and talk show hosts. They just went postal. Look at this French guy. It's time for freedom fries again. I thought you were our ally. You better support us in whatever we do. And I said, no. You know what? Every country needs to make the best decision for them. Right. Yes, like supporting, following the U.S. is a common strategy for most of the, this G7, a lot of these big countries, especially a country like Canada. My wife's Canadian. I've got 3 children. 2 of them were born in Canada. So my wife and 3 kids are all Canadian citizens. And, so I've got a very close connection with Canada. But one of the criticisms I have is usually Canada, they don't really think for themselves. They kind of blindly follow the U.S. on whatever. They really are, they're always going to follow the U.S. in whatever we do. And I just say, hey, this is, as Canada, you're an independent country, you need to make your own decisions, right? And we saw kind of a whole catastrophe with the Meng Wanzhou situation where Meng Wanzhou, and that was really kind of a pivotal point for my channel as I was in Vancouver. I happened to be in Vancouver. I moved there in 2017. The Meng Wanzhou thing didn't happen to 2019, but it was just amazing because it's like you've got the 2 big superpowers, U.S. and China, battling it out in a courtyard that's 20 minutes from my house, and it's open to the public. Everybody, you can just walk right in. There's Meng Wanzhou right there. You've got these lawyers, and I'm like, wow, this is fascinating.
Wow, so you were there?
I was there. Oh, wow. I'd just go down there all the time and just and just walk in. But it was also a really interesting thing because I started making videos about what I learned at the testimony, and what I noticed is that a lot of those videos did very well on YouTube. And immediately, there's kind of a little designated media area. There's like 50 chairs over here to the right where the media can sit. So I'd go in that area and I would just sit there and, you'd have like the South China Morning Post, you'd have the Vancouver Sun, you'd have all these newspapers that are, sitting there reporting. And then all of a sudden, like one guy's like, hey, I've seen your YouTube video. Hey, aren't you that YouTuber guy? And it's like, man, that last video you did, it got like 200,000 views. And so, all of a sudden, I really realized this, that, the kind of the importance of YouTube and really how things have shifted, because now all of a sudden, as I kept going back, people started recognizing, hey, he's the YouTuber who's covering this case. He's the YouTuber that's making videos on this. And for me, it's great content, right? Like if the fans like it, the videos are successful, keep doing that, right? Yeah. It's a good strategy, right? That's why I made probably 6 or 7 videos about Meng Wanzhou. I talked to the #1 lawyer from Canada that was following it from day one. Fantastic, phenomenal. I just grabbed him outside of the court. I was like, hey, can I just do a quick interview with him? It's about 10 minutes long. And he just said, there's no way. Like basically they've got nothing on her. They're going to let her go. This is my prediction. And I'm like, hey, again, it's not my opinion here. I'm like, I'm not an expert. I'm not a lawyer. So, hey, this is the #1 lawyer that deals with this kind of stuff in Canada. Hey, by the way, he's dual citizen with U.S. Canada, so he knows all of this international law. And I was like, hey, great. Like, tell me, show me the insides. And he loves to chat. So it ended up being really good.
Well, let me ask you, because I'm a little bit, I have 2 questions for you. First off, just with that court case, because I didn't really follow that case. What was the outcome?
Well, the outcome is that basically it was kind of a win-win for both U.S. and China, because essentially she has a non-guilty verdict, but I think she had to sign, basically a piece of paper that stated that she did some things that were not correct. So it's kind of like the U.S. can basically, say like, okay, look, she admitted that she did this, but then China can say, well, at the end of the day, she's non-guilty. Like she has a non-guilty verdict, and basically they just dropped the charges and then off she went.
Okay.
And so it was,
life moved on.
And life moved on. Yeah. Magically life moved on. But it really dragged out a really long time, and there's a lot of things that went down. Like for example, very basic things. It was amazing. Is when they arrested her, right? They actually had like 5 security guards. So imagine she's flying in from, I believe she flew in from Mexico into Vancouver, or no, I think she was on her way to Mexico. I think it was coming in. No, it was coming in from somewhere. She was coming in from Asia, landing in Vancouver, basically just in the transit zone, going to Mexico. And so she did not clear customs in Canada. She was, just transferring. But what they did is they had 5 officers go on board to the plane and arrest her, like right in the business class seat.
Wow.
Right. And so they had asked her, it's like, don't you think that's a bit excessive? And he's like, and in the court case, he had said, well, we didn't know if she had any weapons on her. We had to make and we had to make sure that our safety was paramount. So we needed all 5 of them there. And I'm like, any weapons? How are you going to bring a weapon on a plane? Like she's flying. She's flying like Cathay Pacific or whatever airline it was. I mean, it's a major airline.
Well, they're treating her like a terrorist.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, it was just, and so the other thing is they, they took all of her stuff away. They started questioning her they didn't give access to a lawyer. They were illegally questioning her. They took her, things like this, where it's just like, hey, we're in Canada where you have these rights and these laws that are in place, and you broke them. So there's, and that's 100% fact. Like nobody can deny that, the way that the Canadian officers broke protocol and did that. And one of the things that became kind of controversial, I was, when you go to the courtroom, you would check in and you have to, check all your stuff in. You can't have any metal or anything on you. And so I just talked to the officers there. I was like, hey, what do you guys think? And the guy was just like, this whole thing's a nightmare for us Canadians. It's like, literally, we're just doing Donald Trump's dirty work. And I was like,
security guards were saying
security guard said that. Oh. So what I do is I was like, so I just casually dropped that in an interview, and I just, my YouTube video. So I was like, well, I was talking to the security guard today, and this is exactly what he said. So all of a sudden, all the newspapers are like, well, who said that? Who said that? Who's the quote? Can I quote this guy? And I'm like, well, it's not a quote. I'm just like, just casual conversation, but I had some newspaper, reporters actually kind of attack me in Vancouver and write some nasty things about me.
Of course, but that comes with the territory, right?
It does. I think there was a little bit of frustration that, I know one of the guys, he has a very bad reputation in Vancouver, but he was a little jealous that here's this, YouTuber coming in and getting all these views on videos where, he's trying to, he's basically trying, he's trying to sell newspapers, so it's just kind of shows you, podcasts are the way. Podcasts, YouTube videos. I mean, this is where people are getting their news, and there's a big need for this independent voice. I think that's really important.
Well, it's getting stronger and stronger.
Oh,
for sure.
Absolutely.
I mean, even just rewinding, a few years back, let's say even when COVID just first hit or right before it first hit, I remember having conversations with friends who, in the States, that follow media, traditional media, very closely, certain like Wall Street Journal or New York Times, for example. And anytime you bring up any type of podcaster or YouTuber or whatever, they're like, oh, well, why do you watch that? Why do you listen to that? You know?
Yeah.
It's like they don't fact check. They just talk, right? Yeah. I'm like, well, have you watched some of these people? Like some of these people are coming in from like really knowledgeable areas,
Well, even the mainstream media fact checking is questionable these days too.
So questionable.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but yeah, go ahead.
But this leads directly to kind of what I want to ask you. As successful as your YouTube channel has become, like how do you keep a balance, right? Because like I know with this like US China stuff, it's really easy to go down a certain path with that, especially when you're getting positive reinforcement for the content you make, right?
Yeah.
And how it's so politicized, and so like you can really find yourself going down a certain path or a certain hole. What's your method, or do you have a method of trying to kind of stay balanced with the whole thing, given that you're going to have people who really support you, you're going to have your critics and haters, of course.
For sure.
How do you deal with all that, and how do you make sure the content you're putting out there is still on brand for you in terms of really trying to bring the world together and not just so one-sided all the time?
That's a great question. I mean, I think you really have to, try to look at it from both sides. And I think that's where, for example, I'll give you a great example is when we look at situation of Taiwan, right? Like this is a very controversial topic, and there's in the United States, I mean, we have a very much a mentality of we need to arm Taiwan, we need to sell them more weapons so we can deter. You always hear that, and so I've kind of taken a stance of, well, I look at it a little bit differently, and I have a unique position that I haven't really heard many other people say, and I feel that China relies on Taiwan just as much as we all do, right? Every country in the world depends on those microchips coming from Taiwan. And I think that China is not stupid in the fact that they're going to act irrationally. I don't foresee China just one day waking up and saying, you know what? Send in the troops. Like, we're just going to take it over this morning. Like, that's just like a flip of a switch. Because the other thing that's difficult is, and what we've seen with the Russia-Ukraine war, is that, the world would certainly unite against China. They would condemn that. But the thing is that, it would really erase a lot of the 50 years of economic progress that China has built up. And the other thing is I don't think people really understand, for again, when you look at, we're in China, 1.4 billion people here, they look at Taiwan and that is their brothers and sisters there. It's not like it's another country that it's like, Thailand, for example, where they don't, it's like, oh, that's a completely different people. I mean, they speak the same language. You have so many connections between Taiwan and mainland, with families. So, I don't see China really, invading Taiwan. I don't see them doing that because, internationally, every country in the world, including, not every country, but, by far the vast majority of countries in the world, including our home country, they recognize that Taiwan is part of China. You already have this very unique circumstance called the status quo that has kind of perfectly works for everybody, and it has been worked for many years. And I think when you listen to the thing that we have to really, have to get our heads around is you listen to some of the better people in Washington that have a more solid head on their shoulders with real experience. I'll give you an example. A gentleman by the name of Ryan Haas. He works for the Brookings Institute, I believe it's called. It's a think tank in Washington, D.C. I've had a chance to meet him. Him and I were both in Vanderbilt University, March 2021, giving a keynote speech about China. And we had a chance to chat, and it was great because he served in Beijing underneath the Obama administration, for many years. Speaks Chinese. He has a lot of on the ground experience. And when you listen to a guy like this speak, you hear him, and essentially he's saying, there's a couple things he said was really interesting. He said, number one, the United States has predicted 10 out of the last 0, invasions of Taiwan, right? Like we've basically, we're always sounding the alarm bells, but actually China's never really done anything. In addition to that, to sum it up, he says kind of the best policy is to kind of kick this down the road and basically the status quo. Like, we got to really push for the status quo. And that's something that I'm like, this is a guy that really gets it. He is very much, he understands the situation, the nuance that's required. And then I look at another guy that I shared on Twitter. There's a very conservative, ultra-conservative Republican that's running. Is East Indian, his background, I think, is Vivek.
Oh, yeah, he's running for president.
Running for president. Yeah. So, I mean, in a video, I shared this yesterday on Twitter, but he says, all right, this is how we deter China. It's called American exceptionalism. We put an AR-15 in the hands of every Taiwanese person. We open up an NRA office inside of Taipei, and that, my friends, is how you solve the Taiwan problem. We come in there, guns a-blazing, full American style, American exceptionalism at its best. That'll teach Xi Jinping a lesson. And I'm like, wow. Okay.
Wait, you really said all that?
I'm kind of like,
paraphrasing.
I'm paraphrasing, but it's like 90% there. Oh yeah. I mean, you can. So, and so I shared, I was just like, wow, just when you thought a U.S. politician couldn't be any dumber and I'm going to just call him out on it. I mean, just really completely disconnected from reality and what the situation is. You have a guy like Vivek come along that just spouts this nonsense. But here's the issue, and this is the issue, what we see, Justin, is that he is appealing to the very far right conservatives in America. And at this point where we are, right, this is June 2023, right? We're less than 18 months away from the 2024 election. So for him, he is trying to garner those votes. And so
you think it's strategic?
It's strategic. I mean, maybe he really believes in that, but I mean, he knows saying something like that, well, he's going to certainly rally all of the very far right conservatives that are 100% want more guns in America and love that Second Amendment.
Well, he has to rattle the boat, right? Otherwise, he doesn't stand. Well, he probably doesn't stand a chance either way. But
he doesn't.
But he needs to make some noise.
He needs to make some noise, and that's unfortunate about our political system. What we're gonna, where we're getting into this, 18-month long just slugfest where basically every politician, you have to be extreme, right? How else are you going to stand out? I mean, I'm convinced that, guys like Senator Tom Cotton from Arkansas, this guy is a nobody, right? But all of a sudden he starts getting on air on like CNBC and these talk shows, because I remember for, his whole theory was, we should not be sending American athletes to the Beijing 2022 Olympics because China is going to steal their DNA and they're going to use it to make superhumans in their military to overtake us. I mean, not
Obviously.
not a joke. But again, like, you come out with a view that extreme, you're going to get TV time. And that's where we are right
for
now.
For better or for worse.
For better or for worse. And it's definitely for worse, but that's where we are in American society right now. And so that's where where I'm going to go back to your original question, where I look at, like, that's why I'm trying to listen to a guy like Ryan Haas, who obviously, wants to operate in America's best interest and works very close with people in Washington, D.C., but brings in that experience. And what I find is that people that have the real life experience that are here, just a few days ago, we had the CEO of J.P. Morgan, who had a huge financial conference here in Shanghai. So, we hear all of this rhetoric of, like, we need to move every factory out of China, completely cut off from China. That's impossible. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen at all. Meanwhile, you have, the CEOs of these big companies are coming to China right now. And same thing. We saw the German companies, the German executives. As soon as Xi Jinping got his third term, Olaf Scholz from Germany, first Western leader it's like, I'm booking it straight over to Shanghai and I'm bringing 12 of the biggest German CEOs with me. We're all going to go meet with Xi Jinping. Why? Because Germany's getting hammered right now, right? They've just officially entered into a recession. They're getting absolutely crushed economically. They're in a huge energy crisis.
But, like, that's the contradiction of it all. We have one narrative that is like kind of the political narrative of a lot of Western countries trying to pull away and be less dependent on China. And, that's on a political spectrum. But then you have, like, the trade and business spectrum, which is only increasing.
Yes.
Just like with, like we talk about the relationship between U.S. and China deteriorating, in which, I think anyone with eyes can see it has. But again, like last year was the record number of, like, record amount of trade between the two countries.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's like, that's where it gets a little bit complex and confusing, because it's like, how do you reconcile that, right?
Yeah.
And then it makes it much harder to also kind of predict future events, because you don't really know which side is going to win out. Is it going to be like the political stuff? Is it going to be the business and economic stuff?
Yeah.
Because they don't always go hand in hand. And and in this case, they kind of run counter to each other.
And that's why I always say, as I say, politicians are going to be like Vivek. They're going to say things to get votes. And that is one of the downfalls of this democracy. And again, please don't take me that I'm anti-democratic. I think democracy has been a very successful form of government. But I'm a very big advocate that it's not the only form of government, right? There's, every country needs to figure out what is their best system for them. And you look at a country like Singapore, for example. I like to reference Singapore because I think it's a phenomenal country, but it's much more closer to a one-party state. Effectively, it is a one-party state, but that has more, Western values. But they've probably been the biggest success story of the past, 70 years. It's incredible what Singapore has done.
Yeah.
So again, very different form of government than what we have in the U.S. But what I always say is that politicians say things for reactions and trying to get the vote. That is their intention. How can I keep my power? How can I stay in power and do what I need to do to continue and get another 4-year term? And as opposed to the businessmen are, well, how do we make more money? How are we going to leverage, especially if you are Starbucks CEO, Nike CEO, how are we going to maximize shareholder value, right? And China comes into play there, right? And I think now the term has shifted from decoupling to de-risking, and there's certainly examples of companies that are, diversifying their supply chains. For example, Apple is a good example where they've essentially made everything here in China. And now they're saying, okay, we're going to start opening up some factories in India. We're going to start shifting some iPhone production there and
Diversifying.
Sure. But even that's being said, they said within, 3 to 4 years, we can probably make up to 20% of our iPhones in India. Okay. Well, the other 80 is coming from China. So yeah, you can diversify a little bit, but 80% is, it's your whole, that's the vast majority. So, you're still relying very much on China. Yeah. China's still going to be this vital piece to our world economy. And again, that's why it goes back to the central mission of, how do we find a way to work together, right? Even the best financial experts then that really understand all of this trade, they realize, there is no possibility of us ever decoupling from China. That is an impossibility. Anybody that says that doesn't understand how our global economy really works. Now, certainly we can de-risk and we can, open up, again, Apple, okay, we're going to open up some factories in other places. And we've started to see that even in textiles and stuff where, there's a lot of manufacturing done in Vietnam now, where Nike is not just a manufacturing solely in China. But the issue is, well, and I've done a lot of research on this, is that it's very hard to compete with China because China, from the logistics, is so
and all the raw materials, most of the raw materials come from China anyway. So
do.
even if you produce in Vietnam, you got to ship all that raw materials
trained
to
skill throughout
Vietnam.
these years.
Yeah, and then there's the production capacity aspect of it all.
Exactly. So it's not as easy as just like, well, let's just build the same factory in Vietnam. It's not as simple.
Do you think it would be? I'm asking a question here. I don't have the answer, but what do you think if the media were to talk more or put more focus on, let's say, economic trade and just like what Justin was saying, that last year was the biggest year for trade between China and the U.S. If it was more focused on that side as opposed to just pure politics, do you think the common person would have a different view on China?
I think so. I think they would, but that's the problem with our media right now is that, as we know, fear sells, right? Fear,
Alarmism.
Alarmism or anger. I mean, we tap into emotions, right? We can, and so the problem is that if we say that China is the biggest threat to American democracy, which I don't get at all. I mean, right? I mean, the biggest threat to American democracy is within our borders. It's the current culture war that we're having. It's this current divide between, there's not an American that will not admit that we have a very polarized society right now in America, right? It's very much you right or you left.
And you really feel it because we haven't been back in the States in a while.
Like you're with us or you're against us.
Yeah, this is an interesting statistic that really sums it up. I quoted this in a video earlier, but I think it was something along the lines of 94% of Americans are completely okay with interracial marriage, okay? Which is great, right? Because obviously no problem there at all, right? My wife is Chinese, right? If you're black or white or Hispanic, doesn't matter. 94% of Americans across the board completely accepting of interracial marriage, but it's interparty marriage that has now become the deal breaker. Okay, so that's the issue. Is that basically Democrats? I think it's something around the lines of like I think it's a little bit more for Republicans. Let's just say these numbers are a little bit off. I know the 94% for the interracial marriage, but basically it's something high like 60 to 70% of Republicans say I will not support my child marrying somebody of a different political party, and then it's Democrats is just a little bit below that. But it's essentially the vast majority of both Republicans and Democrats are saying that is the pivotal issue for me. Marry whatever type of person you want, they just have to be our political party. And so you see this divide that's happening in America where, and you see this very much on TikTok and Instagram where, you have, if you are a Republican, well, you start subscribing to these very pro-right groups, and then all of your news feeds is basically one echo chamber.
It gets so easy. I was actually talking to Howie the other day because I was on Instagram, and before my Instagram feed was very positive, very innocent positive. It was funny memes and stuff like that. And then there was one kind of I guess you would call it a little more far right kind of a video. And I was like, okay, I was just curious and I tapped into it. Now, my entire feed is politicized.
Yeah.
And it's just that easy. And then you get sucked in, like you said, to that echo chamber or that mental diet. Right?
Yeah. And I saw this one clip that kind of went viral, for the conservative group. And it was basically a gentleman comes up to the door and he's wearing a mask and he just knocks on the door. He said, "Hi, I'm whatever my name is. I'm running for, city council." And the guy's like, "Are you a Democrat?" "Yes, you can leave now." And so and everyone's just laughing and it's like, haha, that guy told him so. But that's where we're at, where it's just what's your party? "Oh, okay, I'm a Democrat. I don't want to speak to you at all."
That's where the line is drawn.
That's where the line is, and so, my thing is I, as a bridge builder, I'm willing to, I can talk to anybody about, you can hate China all you want. let's have a conversation, because I'm pretty sure I can provide some nuance to you that maybe will open your mind up a little bit. Or and depending on, I don't really care if you're a Democrat or Republican. At the end of the day, I look at you as an American, right? I mean, that's what we have to look at. That's where we've lost it in America, is that, when it was Trump versus Hillary, it's like, good versus evil. It's like, well, who's good, who's evil? I mean, both sides are kind of saying,
depends on who you ask.
Yeah, but it's kind of both sides are saying the same thing. I'm like, well, it's in a choice between an American and an American, right? And at the end of the day, like, for example, Joe Biden's our president right now. If you didn't vote for him, well, you know what? He's still your president, right? I mean, we still have to respect that position. That's one thing I was always taught is, no matter, that's
well, not when he's like falling everywhere.
Yeah,
it makes it hard to respect him when he's falling.
It's still like he's our president. I agree. I mean,
I'm joking.
No. I mean, it is difficult for him at his age. I mean, I think everybody has legitimate concerns over him, being able to do the job at his age. I mean, and that's where I'm just like, gosh, I hope in 2024, I mean, I think it'd be really sad if it's Trump versus Biden again.
Yeah.
What do you think it's going to be? What would you be your best guess right now?
I don't know. I think DeSantis is really going to be leading the Republican Party. But I mean, the problem that I was reading an article the other day that he is bringing in, like he wants to form his China committee, if you will, and the guys that he is bringing in, I mean, one of them is Gordon Chang, and so it's like, well, okay, we're going to have now Gordon Chang, an official guy, with a link right to the president and the White House. I mean, this is just, you can't find a guy that's more disconnected from reality, regarding China and just the nonsense that he spews. And I mean, you got guys, for example, there's another guy that's frequently on the financial channels in the U.S., a hedge fund manager named Kyle Bass, who, his claim is that China has specifically genetically altered the COVID virus, and he made it so that it would be more deadly towards Caucasians, right? They basically genetically altered this that Asians would not be that susceptible to it. And I'm like, when you're on national television spewing this, like, you're out, man. That you've completely lost any credentials or any. We cannot listen to people like this. Like,
but I'm sure there's people that buy into it.
Oh, of course it is, right? But that's what I'm saying is that, I mean, like, for example, the Republicans put together this the Republican House on China committee, and you basically have, these 5 people that are, or whoever's on the committee. I mean, they're just so anti-China. It's basically, all of us, let's just see how can we hate China more, and so there's no constructive policy. There's no constructive dialogue at all. I mean, Fareed Zakaria on CNN came out and he's I really like Fareed because he called it out and he said, this is such dangerous groupthink, and it is such a dangerous thing that this is doing because you know what, I mean, Fareed is really great because he's like, hey, we can call China out on this. We can say this about China, but at the end of the day, we need China. We need to be more objective about China. We need better. We can do better than this. This is not helpful at all. And that's very brave of him to come out and say that. I mean, he even blasted his own network, he even blasted CNN for, just the ridiculous outrage over the spy balloon and, how that whole thing, really, really came about. And it was just more like, I think Fareed's point was really like, wow, I mean, like, if you really want to distract Washington for 7 days and set every politician on his head, just send a balloon over. Because like for 7 days, we had no idea what to do. And basically everybody was distracted. And it's like, it's a balloon. Like, it's like, and I mean, Fareed's point was like, China has 100 spy satellites all over the U.S. I mean, like in space, they have hundreds of satellites around the world. They've taken as many detailed photos of the United States in every secure area. I mean,
there's probably not one square inch they haven't seen.
There's not one square inch that
in
China,
high definition,
and vice versa. I
mean, vice versa.
The U.S. has spy satellites, and we've taken it. You don't think the United States government has every square inch of China written down and studied?
And both countries are hacking each other.
And both countries have spies.
But also, this anti-China rhetoric is also bipartisan, though. I feel like it's not just conservatives.
It is. Ironically, it's the one thing that is bipartisan in America. That is the only thing right now that's bipartisan in America right now. And so, I mean, it is a very it's very divisive right now. I mean, it's a very polarized society. I know you guys haven't been back for a while, but I think what I'm hoping for is that we could get some. I'd love to see some younger people in the race for 2024. That would be my. I mean, let's just say if it's a DeSantis and a Robert Kennedy Jr. from the Democrats, I mean, at least you got somebody that's a little bit younger than Biden pushing 82, or I mean,
Agreed.
I mean,
Yeah,
it's
but I
very
mean,
difficult.
whoever gets to that position, though, no one wants to be seen or portrayed as soft on China, right? So
Yeah.
they're gonna ring that bell, that alarmist bell. I think.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of it, this is something I've been thinking too. Is like talking about like the alarmism and the fear mongering, which is something I mention a lot on this show. I don't know. I see it as it's like the China collapse theory, and you were mentioning Taiwan too in terms of potential invasion, stuff like that. People have been saying that for decades now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then, but like it reminds me of the saying, like even a broken clock is right 2 times a day.
Right.
So the thing is, like, if you keep spouting that like alarmist thing, whatever that thing is, like whether it's China's going to collapse any minute now or whatever it is, eventually there's going to be problems and crisis right down the road, and there's going to be conflict, and then people are going to be like, see. I was right, even though like they've been wrong for like 10 years straight.
Right, exactly.
It's like it's still like that broken clock that's like right 2 times a day.
You're right. I mean, that's the playbook for Gordon Chang. I mean, he wrote The Coming Collapse of China in 2001, and here we are in 2023, and China hasn't collapsed. And I mean, it's again like, if China were supposedly to collapse, then I'm sure he'd come out and be like, "See, I predicted it. I was."
Isn't there that guy? I've seen him on the podcast, Peter Zehan or something like that.
Yeah, Peter Zehan.
Some crazy guy. He's also saying the same thing. I haven't really followed him, but I've heard a few things he said.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely a lot more well researched, and certainly a lot more. He's definitely a lot smarter than Gordon Chang. Gordon Chang just really goes down these conspiracy theories, and I mean, he's not a very. I mean, it was the same thing where, for example, I remember him saying something along the lines of, "Oh, I think with the United States, we should sanction China, and I think as soon as we sanction them, then that means all of the Navy vessels will immediately become American property." I'm like, what does that even mean? Like, that doesn't even make sense what you're saying. Like, no, that doesn't work like that. Like, it was just like so far from reality where it's like you really can't take the guy serious.
Yeah.
Like Peter Zian, I think is that he's a lot more well educated and a lot smarter. So I mean, he has his theories that that, like, for example, I mean, China's got some big issues that it's going to have to work through, right? I mean, as for example, we know that it has a very low birth rate. We know that the workforce is going to be declining. The population of China is declining. So how is China going to deal with that, in the next 10, 20, 30 years from now, right? They're going to have, 200 million workers basically retire in the next, 10 to 15 years. And that's going to shift the whole economy around a lot. I mean, we're seeing right now record youth unemployment, right? 20%, of unemployment amongst the youth. I mean, that's a major issue. I mean, I don't try to step around these issues and pretend that they don't exist. I mean, but that being said, I mean, this was an interesting thing where I was, again, talking to my neighbor who had asked me that question, about my social credit scores. And he said, he's like, Cyrus, does China have enough food? Like, can China feed its people? Like, I think that's the major concern. I'm like, well, you know what? I mean, like, I told him, I said, hey, you know what country does not have a lot of issues that they're facing right now? I said, look at the United States of America right now. All right. Our homelessness issue is through the roof. We have a massive drug epidemic that's going on, but just the cost of things in America is outrageous right now. I mean, it is truly unbelievable. I mean, for example, I took my 3 kids to Subway, okay, for lunch. So let's do a little test here, okay? So I got a foot-long turkey sandwich, okay? Then I got, so my twins, they split that, and then I got a little 6-inch ham sandwich, okay?
1 foot long, 1 6-inch.
1 6-inch, 1 foot long, 1 6-inch, and I got they got
Was
their
it a
own
meal? Like it come with?
wasn't
like,
a meal,
yeah, okay.
just the sandwiches.
Just a sandwich, okay.
Okay, just the sandwiches, and then they each got. I don't want them drinking soda or anything, so I got them water bottles. So they brought their own water, and then I got 3 cookies for them. So 3 chocolate chip cookies, a 12-inch, and a 6-inch.
Okay, those 3 cookies are going to put you over the top right there.
Hold on. So let's. How much did that cost? How much
Total
did that
bill?
lunch cost me?
$21.
$18.
32.
Damn.
$32
At Subway now?
at Subway. So this is in Las Vegas. $32.
Well, you can go into like a real restaurant and have a meal for that.
It's insane.
Well, I don't know, not now, but like
I mean, dude, real restaurants.
was there.
real restaurants are crazy. So, I mean, I gotta show you. Okay, so that's one. That is all right. So that's Subway. Okay. Now I will say there was like now they have an option there where you can tip. So I tip like so I think it came up to like $28, and then I tipped like 15%, so it was like 31. And because you feel, I mean, you got to tip these guys.
Well,
I mean, they're not
it's a
making
tipping
anything.
culture.
It's a tipping culture, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so with tip, $32, somewhere around right
Is
around
15% tip where it starts? Is that the
there.
lowest?
15 is like
I thought it's 20 now, though, isn't it?
it's kind of 20 now. It's
Right.
like 20, 22, 25,
it's
right?
very-
But okay, but here's another one. I mean, this is mind blowing, right? So I think I had I think I deleted the photo. But anyways, I mean that's just Subway. So I'm like if you are, I'm like, I mean, geez, Subway sandwiches used to be like $5 back in the day, right? I mean, you get a Subway sandwich for $5, and so I'm just like, how are people if you're making minimum wage right now? How are you functioning right now, right? Like, and so I read another article that said somewhere in France that the average French citizen right now, is that after they pay their, their mortgage and their things, basically their monthly bankroll that they need to survive, they're left over with about €100 a month right now. And because the cost of everything has gone up, the inflation has gone up. So, I mean, we look at that in the sense of, I mean, I look at America, we have a very big divide. I mean, we talk about the social divide in China. There's a lot of mega wealth, a lot of ultra wealthy and a lot of poor. I see the exact same thing in the United States. It's a lot of, we have a lot of wealthy people. There's a lot of wealth there. There's a lot of poor. And then, hopefully you're somewhere in the middle that, is doing okay. But I mean,
well, I think like that's where like
every country's got a lot that they're dealing with.
Yeah,
is my point.
exactly. And I think like a lot of the, I don't know, I get the sense that like for content creators like yourself, a lot of the criticism for like, I think like well-meaning people, obviously you have like real toxic haters who are just like not connected to reality, like you said. Those are easy to ignore. But I think you also have like well-meaning people who also feel like, hey, you're just looking at the positive things about China. There's a lot to criticize here. And that's absolutely true. But I don't think that's the point, though. Like I honestly don't think that's the point. There's definitely a lot of criticisms here. But the point is, well, not the point, but the reality is there's a lot to criticize anywhere you go, right?
Yeah.
But the bigger problem is the division, right? That's the headline here.
Right.
Is the demonizing and the division and even the misinformation. And yes, there's good and bad things about every country, and there's certainly good and bad things about China. But the real headline is, why are there these narratives out there that are trying to divide, create fear, create hate, and just make any sort of like political coming together, whether it's socially or politically or through governments, like that much harder? Because like you're painting, even the politicians are starting to believe that, or whether they believe that or not, that at least they're using that as a tool to on their campaign trails, right? So it's like, so that's my response to like, yeah, like we can harp on the bad things in America all day long. We can harp on the bad things in China all day long. But is that the point? The point is we need to come together. And I think, and this goes back to my, earlier question of like, how do you try to check yourself? Because I know within myself, because I see that the kind of anti-China narrative is so strong out there, I try to correct for that and dismiss a lot of that. But as you try to dismiss a lot of that, inherently, you're going to be viewed as very pro-China, right? Because you're trying to dismiss a lot of the anti-China stuff. And so the goalposts are kind of shifting, in which it's very easy all of a sudden to get too far in one direction where people you potentially want to reach and talk to, people who are more or less reasonable, relatively open-minded people, will also see you as like, oh, you're just way too pro-China. Like, I need to hear the other side.
Right.
It's very easy to go down that road when you're really, being defensive, which I won't speak for you, but for me, definitely, I find myself in that very defensive mode sometimes, where it's like, no, it's not like that. You don't understand,
Right.
And then you do lose a bit of nuance, but again, like I said, like I don't think that's not the point. Like if you want me to harp on the bad things, sure, we know, but we can harp on bad. We can trade bad for bad all day long. But what are we getting out of that?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that all we hear about China in the West is bad. So I try to provide some nuance and say, well, let me just say some of the positive things that China's doing, and I think one of the simple ways that I try to do that is that I always say, right now in China, if there's somebody sitting at a Starbucks, typing on their computer. There's people going out to dinner. There's a grandma, walking her, picking up her daughter, her granddaughter from school. There people are coming together for meals. People are going on holidays. People are watching their favorite TV drama, and people are going to a restaurant and talking about what happened in their latest TV drama. They're going to concerts. They're doing a lot of these normal things that we do in the United States as well. And so that's where I think one of the interesting things that I point out is that in America, government and politics tend to be a very popular conversation piece, right? And even if you are in a group with, let's say a lot of conservatives, you tend to be like, well, did you see the latest thing that the left tried to do? And it becomes a kind of a topic point. Meanwhile, in China, I said, the reality is that your average Chinese person, they're not talking about the government that much, right? It's not like it's like, well, did you see what Beijing did today, honey? Well, yeah, I just saw that new policy. That it's like
they're not obsessed with it.
They're not obsessed, and there's certainly an argument for that in the sense that there's a one party state here.
It makes sense for them not to be obsessed.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like it is what it is, and that's all they know as well. So it's kind of the same thing where what I always say, look, all as an American is a two-party system, right? We only have one additional party than China, right? It's not like Canada has 5, right? Canada has 5 parties, so that are 5 legit parties. Whereas U.S., you can have maybe the Green Party or something, but it's
really only 2 parties.
It's really only 2 parties for real, all things considered. So the reality is that yes, we have one additional party than than China does, but I do see that it's just a very interesting. I just try to provide some nuance. I mentioned this in an earlier video. 1 out of 10 Australians now in a recent poll now feel that China will militarily invade Australia. Yeah. Meanwhile, 1 in 20 in Taiwan believe that. So, it's incredible, right? 1 in 10 Australians.
What's happening in Australia is pretty crazy right now in terms of like the shift and how fast it's shifting towards like kind of like anti-China rhetoric and how people are actually buying into all of that.
Yeah.
Right. Australia is an interesting case because I feel like I'm seeing that happen in real time.
For me, what's just mind-boggling is this, that your country is spending $368 billion on nuclear-powered submarines. And
the AUKUS deal?
The AUKUS deal. The AUKUS deal to me is makes absolutely no sense at all. No. I just can't. I'm glad I'm not an Australian citizen and paying tax back to Australia, that my government is spending money on that. I'm American. My government spends a lot of money on wars. I got to pay taxes there. But the thing is it's mind blowing to me. $368 billion to get nuclear power submarines to protect you from your number 1 trading partner.
Yeah,
it's just
no one really bats an eye at it too. It's like it's weird because imagine the reverse. Imagine if China did that exact same thing with some South American country or something like that. The shitstorm in the media that would be rained down.
But it comes back to in the last few months, I've made a lot of successful videos that have done really well talking about the Belt and Road Initiative and why China is, why is Africa choosing China? Why is Latin America choosing China? Why is the Middle East choosing China? And it's very interesting because largely speaking, the global South is completely, ignored. I found an amazing poll that I think it was from the Pew Research Center where it said 77% of the world now views China in a negative light. 77%. Yep. For that survey, they interviewed 30 countries. Every single country was from the global north. It was essentially the US, Canada, the EU, Australia, and Japan.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, this is not the world. You're not even close to the world.
Far. They represent a very small percentage of the population of the world.
Very small percentage of the population. So that's where I make the videos where people will say, Cyrus, you're too pro-China. I'm like, No. Listen to this. Is if you have a survey that says 77% of the world and you block out South America, Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East, I mean, that's by far the vast majority of people in this world.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's where, again, like if you take, let's just pick a random country, Bolivia, or any other country, these small, Nigeria, just like, smaller countries. It's like, what do you want? Of course I want to do trade with both the United States and China. And I mean, it was a great interview with the Barbados Prime Minister, who I really like. Is she's very outspoken Prime Minister, and I remember BBC was interviewing her, and she basically the BBC interviewer had said like, well, how do you feel that you're making this connections with China? Like you're in the United States backyard and you're doing a deal with China. First of all, everybody in Latin and South America absolutely hate it when you say you're in the United States backyard. Because it's like, no, we're not.
The way you frame it, right?
The way you frame it, it's like we're not in anybody's backyard. We're an independent country.
Like we're pets.
Yeah, we're not. We don't own you. Yeah, geographically we're located close to the United States. At the end of the day, we're an independent country. And she's just basically called the BBC interviewer out, and she said, well, I would hope that the BBC interviewer would have a little bit more respect for the prime minister of this country, that I can make the best decisions for my country. And again, she said, why do I want to be involved? We're Barbados. We're a tiny country. Of course we want to do business with both China and the US. We're not picking sides here, but so it's the same thing where, I mean, again, I can just give more and more of these examples where Marco Rubio, senator from Florida, is just like, well, you know what? We're not going to be able to sanction anybody because in a few years, everyone's going to be circumventing the U.S. dollar and trading in other currencies, and that's not going to allow us to sanction everybody. Well, it's like, well, yeah, that's kind of the point, bud. Like that's why people are making that shift. Like I'm just reporting on what's happening. Why did Brazil and China just sign a massive currency deal where they're going to start doing trade, and not using U.S. dollars?
I just want to bring back a little bit on that Pew Research that you brought up, because I recently attended this talk from an NYU professor of basically his thesis. Well, he brought up the Pew Research, and I saw like the stats, and the first question that came to mind was, just like you said, why are they only focused on those countries as opposed to the rest of the world, like especially the southern hemisphere? And that was discussed. But what's interesting, the point I'm trying to get at, is that this professor did an independent research to basically for China to see exact same countries. What's the Chinese perspective?
Oh, okay.
Reverse.
Nice.
Right. And I thought you might be interested in this.
Yeah.
So what was interesting was the statistics came out, and generally speaking, of all the countries, I'm going to put U.S. to the side for now, but all of them were either neutral to positive.
Yeah.
Right. Like still.
But explain clearly what you're talking about. You're talking about the Chinese perception of these countries, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So basically, the Pew Research was the other countries' perspectives on China. And like Cyrus was saying, a lot of them was negative, mostly negative, especially the United States was like 70-something%, right?
Yeah.
And it was obvious that the United States was the biggest, like the biggest market, with UK barely behind, right?
But maybe they say everyone was pretty negative.
Yeah. But in general, everyone's pretty negative. And then the reverse came back, and I'm not talking about United States, but all the other countries like even like Holland, Germany, Spain, whatever, etc. Japan, they're either negative or middle, like neutral, or positive, right? With Germany being the most positive, being like, Germans are good, which is interesting, right?
Yeah. Amongst Chinese people.
People, and the demographic is quite wide. I'm not going to go through all the details, but it's a wide demographic of all ages, from like 18 to like 50 something, et cetera.
Right.
First tier to third tier cities. Anyway, so what was interesting was all the statistics were pretty much like neutral to negative to positive, but then you got to the United States, and that's the only statistic where it mirrored. So it was exact same.
Yeah.
It was like 70-something negative towards the United States. So it was like, whoa, that's the one common denominator between the two. We hate each other.
Yeah. Well, and I think what's difficult as well is, and I can, I've seen this a lot, even on Chinese social media, right? I make videos on Chinese social, Douyin, Bilibili, Xigua, and I've seen comments from people that have just like, we don't like Americans anymore. I don't want to watch your videos anymore. Go back to America. You're not welcome in China.
Oh wow! Even with you with all the content you're creating.
Yeah.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
that sucks.
I mean, but again, like very rare, right? I mean, so again, like 1 out of 100, you know, maybe 1 out of 500, right? So I've seen that, you know, those comments before, and again, like I don't get mad at that because it's obviously on the flip side on YouTube, and I certainly have people that don't like me or my content. I mean, and that has to do with every content creator, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you're baking cookies and that's your channel. Like I've got 500,000 subscribers and bake cookies, you're going to get haters, right? Like doesn't matter. That is the internet. So if you are putting yourself out on the internet, you have to have thick skin. You will get haters no matter what you talk about. And so I think the big thing with this one, I get it. Like, you know what? You know, you're kind of feeling that, you know, the United States is kind of attacking China. There's a lot of negative sentiment, and you know what? Like, you're feeling very nationalistic, if you will, or very patriotic. You're feeling very proud of China, and you know that's kind of the thing where I mean, I've had on the flip side. This is an interesting insight. I've had a lot of Chinese students in America who have said, you know, Cyrus, I really appreciate your YouTube channel because I got to be honest with you. Like, I'm an international student from China, and I'm really ashamed to be Chinese. Like, I just hate that I'm Chinese, and I just wish that I could be a different nationality. I wish that I could be more accepted in this. I hate the way that I look because I'm in America, and people know that, you know, my last name is Zhang, so it's like, oh, of course you're Chinese, and I hate it. And that to me is just so heartbreaking because I'll take the time to write an email and just say, look, you have there's no problem like from being from China. Like, you should be completely proud of being from China, you know, and there's no, you know, I mean, and you represent yourself, you're an international student, but the thing is like, that's out of your control, right? None of us can control where we're born in the world, right? And I think, but the other thing is like, you need to be proud of where you're from. There's nothing wrong with someone saying like, I mean, I remember the same thing with the Beijing 2022 Olympics where, you know, people were, I remember like Chinese people are like waving the flags and it's like, oh, I'm sure the Chinese government are forcing these people to be there, you know, cheering. It's like, no, you know what? Like, Chinese people are proud of themselves.
Super proud.
Right. And that's what I say as well, as I say, look, you got to understand as well, is this new generation, you know, if you are born after 1990, all you've known is a modern and progressive China. And that is, I mean, you have not had to, you know, eat the bitterness as the older generation has had to do, where you had to really, you know, suffer and really go through these difficult times. And that's something like, for example, with my father-in-law. I mean, I remember, you know, he's in Guangzhou, and I remember he, you know, he told me, he's like, you know, Cyrus, growing up, I was so poor. I didn't have shoes. Like, I have 7 brothers, you know, like I'm one of 8. I mean, we didn't have shoes growing up. I mean, we grew up in just the streets here in Guangzhou, and then like, when, you know, me and my wife were visiting the family, and we were at a really nice dim sum restaurant, and he's just like, look at my city. Like, this is Guangzhou. Like, I mean, look at this tower. Look at this. And you could just kind of sense this, like, this proud, like, I'm from Guangzhou. Like, this is my city. And it's like, I've been here. Like, I remember when it was nothing, right? I mean, he's 60 something years old. So, I mean, 60 years ago, Guangzhou was nothing. I mean, it was dirt poor, but he's seen it transform, and there's a huge pride.
Sure.
And it's, even for him, it's like, you know, why do I want to live here? Like, this is my town. This is where I want to be. This is where I'm proud of. Yeah. And so again, I mean, it's nothing. You ever meet somebody from Texas? It's the same thing, right? People from Texas are extremely proud of being from Texas. They love it. They think it's the best state in the country. They think it's the best place in the world, and that's great. You know, like, it's a great place. You know, I've been there. It's great, but people are genuinely really proud of that. So again, I think it's just. Kind of going back to the content is just, there's always more context that we can provide. There's always more insights that we can provide, and it's the same thing. Look at that poll, and I have no problem. I mean, that's going to be some of the content I'm going to shoot this week. I'm going to be like, hey, you know, let's jump in a taxi. Ask the taxi driver, what do you think of America?
Kind of like street interviews.
Street interview. What do you think of America? Right. Like, hey, I'm American. What do you think about me? Like, what's your view towards America? How do you view the U.S.-China relationship? And I'm just interested to see what people are going to say. Right? Yeah. I mean, it's gonna be fun, you know.
Well, this is a point I've made before. You know, referring to the study that Howie's alluding to, it's also a snapshot, right? Like, of what the current situation is right now. From the Chinese side, in terms of their perceptions of America being equally as negative as American perceptions of China right now, It is a snapshot because it didn't used to be that way.
It didn't.
And I don't see these things just manifesting in a vacuum out of thin air. I think in the way I've seen it, because I feel like I've seen it shift in real time with all the years I've been living here.
Yeah.
It is a reaction to all that negative media coverage of China from the West.
It is.
It's a direct reaction to it. And the timing
Absolutely.
I'm sure if you go back and, I don't know, I haven't done this study,
The
but I'm sure.
statistics were out comparing, I think it was like 2008 to this recent 2022 poll. It was positive. It was a very positive outlook.
Well, I mean, I
America.
remember 2008. There's an iconic photo of George Bush, our president at the time. He was nearing the end, but it was basically the Summer Olympics in Beijing, and George Bush in the stands with the common people, surrounded by Chinese people, but waving his American flag, basically rooting on Michael Phelps in the pool. And it's like that's such a great image of George Bush, flying to Beijing, attending the Olympics, cheering for his American athletes. And you would almost think that's almost impossible. Like, there's no way. And we saw that, right? Beijing hosted the 2022 Olympics.
Yeah, the Beijing Olympics, that was actually a really great time for the relations between these two countries. That moment in time. I
mean, 2008 was great. I mean, I came to China in January 2007. And so the lead up, I remember at the time there was all these clocks where if you're in Shanghai, like the countdown to Beijing, Beijing 2008.
And the whole world got to see like the incredible opening ceremony with the drums and everything.
Incredible. I mean, but it was also China's coming out party, right?
Yeah.
Then 2 years later, Shanghai hosted the World Expo, which was incredible. And so, I mean, you just had these major events coming in China, and it was just opening up. Everything
felt like, okay, we're trending in the right direction.
We're trending in the right direction. Everything. I mean, Shanghai was the place to be. I mean, that was the place to be. And I was here, and I was like, wow, like this is incredible. And I mean, it was just, I think a lot of the U.S.-China relationship, unfortunately, it kind of starts with the U.S. and China's very reactionary. That's what I always feel is that, for example, you've seen the dislike for China has increased. It's increased first from the American side, and then as a flip side, now Chinese kind of, okay, well, look at all this negative media coverage that you've been doing, and COVID didn't help. I mean, and just it was really difficult. I mean, I remember,
but it's also the local media really pushing that agenda.
Yeah.
So it works both sides.
It does, and it really does. But I mean, the problem
and you
is
get defensive. You get very defensive.
You do get defensive. I mean, and it is difficult as well because I remember, there was a German reporter that was working for Deutsche Welle, and remember the floods that happened maybe a couple years ago. And so, anyways, he goes to the flood area. And he looks very similar to this BBC reporter, and so all of a sudden he's surrounded by Chinese people. I was like, "Hey, you're that BBC reporter guy."
Oh God,
right? and so they're kind of getting really angry at him, and you kind of see him stuttering in like very thick German accent, but he's stuttering in English. Like, oh no, like this is not me. No, please, I do not know. No. This is not me. Please stand here. It's just kind of really speaking broken English. And anyways, he goes on Twitter and he's like, well, I've been living here for a long time. I speak fluent Chinese. And I'm like, whoa. Time out, buddy. I'm like, you speak fluent Chinese? I'm like, bro, you struggled in English. and so I'm like, I called him out in a video and I just said, look, if you spoke fluent Chinese, why are you not speaking Chinese? Right? You could immediately diffuse that situation and just be like, hey, I'm here to cover the floods. Like, that's what I do. Let me just be like, hey, like, I support you guys. Like, this is a tough time, right? Like, you just had a devastating flood. People have been dying here. But, but all of a sudden, Western media is coming and it's like, oh, this is all the government's fault. This is that. It's like, Jesus, it's a tragedy, guys. Like, come on. Like, that's, but I just remember, these kind of claims like that, sometimes it really bothers me when people, for example, we've had, you need people, again, that's why I'm kind of back here, for this trip, and I'm excited for this trip because you need to be here on the ground in China, right? You need to be on the ground, and I think you need to be able to speak Chinese. You need to be able to speak to the local people.
Well, I can imagine, coming from you, the importance of being back here because your content is about China
It
and
is.
the United States.
It
So
is.
I feel like you need to be here to get get on the ground experience again because you've been away for a while.
You do. I mean, and I mean, I have a good excuse because the country was closed for 3 years with COVID.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, that's where I talked to my wife. I mean, we've got 3 small kids back home, and that's a lot of pressure for her to take care of the kids while I'm gone. But I said, hey, honey, like exactly, like I got to be there. I mean, I can't. It's hard for me to. Again, it's interesting because I have such a passion for China, but I would be honest, like over the last couple of years, and especially since moving back to America, my China connection started to kind of wear off a little bit, where I'm just like, you know what, I need to get back on the ground. I need to kind of see it with my own eyes.
You get a little out of touch.
You do, and it'll happen to anybody. But all of a sudden, had a great conversation with my taxi driver down here. I'm just. Rode the maglev down into town, which is always a fun ride. I mean, it's just like, okay, I just need to get back and see what China's like.
Do you have any expectations on this trip?
I don't. That's a great question, Howie. I mean, my expectations is just to be open-minded. I don't want to come here with preconceived notions that, because I don't want to come here and be like, hey, everybody, China's amazing. Like everything's back to normal. Like, let's be honest. I know the economy's not where it needs to be. I know that unemployment, like I'd love to go talk to some youth and be like, hey, you're 21. What's the deal? Like, how are you feeling about your future right now? I want to provide some of that content. I'm not here my goal with this trip is not to come and say, hey, everything's just amazing in China. It's the best place ever. Like everything you hear in Western media is, complete nonsense. It's just more like, let's talk to some real people. Let's go see some things. But it's also to provide that context as well, because, for example, again, I think so many people, they don't have that connection into China. So I've got all my friends in Las Vegas. They are so excited for me to go back to China. My whole group of friends, they now know China because of me. But yeah, I don't have any expectations. I just want to kind of come see what is China like in 2023. That's my question. So I want to answer that question to myself.
There is a question I want to ask you going along with this whole idea of bridging the gap, right?
Yeah.
And making connections with people. And, you mentioned that, in the States, you were having conversations with normal people. For example, like you mentioned your neighbor, right?
Yeah.
With the whole social credit score thing.
Yeah.
What is typically, how do those conversations go typically? I mean, do they end up well? Is there some sort of like logical kind of back and forth where you guys like there's something you feel like you've achieved something?
Yes.
Or does it not usually go well?
I tell you, I mean, I can honestly say I've been back in the U.S. for 10 months now, and I've yet to have a conversation where there has not been progress made and there's not been that person leaving the conversation with more nuance and a little bit more perspective. And I'm talking like I'll speak to this far right on the political spectrum and as far left. I mean, both sides. We'll speak to a variety of people. Now, for myself, I kind of grew up in a more conservative household. I grew up in like a Christian household, and even my kids. We send them to a Christian school in Las Vegas, and so the community there, as you can imagine, is almost all Republican. Very very Republican, very right, which you would tend to think would be a little bit more anti-China, and the interesting thing is I think what people, the first thing that's always nice to kind of open up with is, as I'll always say like, oh, I used to live in China for many years, and kind of the first question is like, oh, do you speak Chinese? And it's like, I do speak Chinese. And then people are like, oh, that's awesome. Like you speak. So that's kind of like the first little entryway in there.
There's like a true curiosity there.
Yeah, right? Because it's like, wow, you speak Chinese. I'm like, I do speak Chinese. I can speak Chinese, and I have a great passion for China. I actually run a YouTube channel about U.S. and China. And then the next thing is kind of like, oh, YouTube. Like a lot of people are like, wow, like I heard like, a lot of people are doing YouTube full time. Like you can make money on YouTube. Like you can. I'm like, oh, it's a legit career. I mean, it's a great opportunity. It's a great business. I mean, yeah. I mean, I love YouTube. I love China. I love speaking Chinese. And then it's always like, well, what about this in China? And so so it kind of I'll pique their curiosity, and then I'm like, yeah, ask me any question you want to about China, right? And so it usually kind of goes more along the lines of, well, when you were living there, did you feel this really big pressure from the government? Like you're just under the communism every day, people everywhere. There's machine guns in the streets, like
Head
everyone
down walking down the street.
Head downs
right?
walking down the street. Like, are there armed guards on every corner watching your every move? Do you have to surrender your U.S. citizenship? How is it to feel the pressure of the government on you every day? That's kind of normally where the story goes. And for me, it's always like, well, no. I mean, to be honest, your life in China is very normal. It's very normal. I mean, again, if you're just living a normal life. I mean, if you're an expat there, you've got a job, so you're working your job, you're doing your job. You're making friends. I said, the nice thing about being an expat is it's a very lively community. You're usually going out a lot. You're meeting other expats. You're meeting other Chinese.
Well, I think the bottom line is just that, like, coming from the States, where I grew up, and now living in Shanghai, like, life is more similar than it is different. And I think if there's any
Very much so.
one message to kind of get across that would kind of frame it in a way I think people could more understand and believe, it's true. It's just that our lives are more similar than they are different.
Yeah, and
we want to exaggerate these differences.
And I completely agree. Life in China is more similar than different. I mean, what freedoms do you not have here? When you're working here as an expat or something that you don't have back home. Sometimes people say, well, what about guns? In China you don't have guns, and I say, you know what? You're right. And now I'm not a big gun fan. I've never owned a gun. I think I've shot a gun maybe once. It's just not. I'm not a big fan. So for me, I'm like, well, here's an interesting perspective for you. I said, in China, you can go out at 2:00 in the morning. You can go out with your friends to a bar. You can walk out at 2:00 in the morning. You can have a nice watch on. You can be wearing brand name designer if you want. You can have a wad full of cash, although China is cashless. But I mean, you could walk out with your wallet, your nice cell phone, your watch on at 2:00 in the morning at any street in Shanghai, and nothing will happen to you.
Yeah.
Okay. You cannot do that inside of any major city in the United States, right? You're not going out past 10 a.m. rolling like that, or 10 p.m., right?
Yeah.
You're not.
The equivalent is New York City. You're not doing that in New York City.
Yeah, you're not doing that in New York City. You're not doing that in Atlanta, LA, Chicago.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not doing any major city. You're not doing that, right? You're not going out looking like that at that time. So I said, you're right. There is no guns there, but you enjoy. I said, let's be honest. Like the school shootings is a very personal thing for me. I think it's an absolute disease that it's unfortunate. It's an incurable disease that will not get solved in the United States, and we're the only country that's infected by it. And so for me, I'm like, I will happily trade in my right to own a gun to live in a society where I don't have to worry about that. I mean, as you guys know, I mean, our gun violence is absolutely idiotic. I mean, it's just beyond stupid. It's insane. You cannot wrap your head around it. And this is something that, for you guys living here, and when I lived here for many years, I mean, and even for me in Canada, I mean, it doesn't exist. You don't have to worry about that. That is not a fear that you have here.
Yeah.
And so even some people are like, well, that's an interesting perspective, that you don't, have that, because obviously, for example, at our school where our kids are at, we're having fundraisers to have armed security guards there, because and so we do. I mean, we have armed security guards at there with.
This is in Vegas.
This is in Vegas, absolutely. And I mean, and my Canadian friends are like, "Are you serious? Like, you're sending your kids to a school with an armed security guard? Like, he's packing heat?"
But I can understand.
And I'm like, yes, because you're in America. That's exactly
because
what
the alternative is even scarier if there aren't any.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like, I definitely feel better having an armed security guard. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'd love to send my kid to a school where we don't need that. We're in America. You need it.
Yeah,
because that's the unfortunate reality of America.
You know what's insane? It's like, I'm having conversations with my wife. We are recent parents, right? So we're having conversations about, okay, well, in the future, let's go back to America, for schooling and stuff like that. But I'll tell you, my first thought in my mind was that not the America I know now. Like I feel a little bit more wary, meaning guns.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
Like we grew up around guns,
Yeah.
It's not like guns is a weird or new thing for us, but it's the idea of mass shootings and the statistics that have come out with mass shootings is insane.
It wasn't really like a thing when we were growing up.
It's insane.
No, I mean, I graduated high school in 2002, And I remember Columbine was 1999,
Yeah.
right? So that was my freshman year of high school. And I mean, that was really,
That was like our introduction to
that was
like,
the introduction, right? That was really the first mass shooting in a
Yeah.
school. I mean, that rocked the entire country. I mean,
Yeah.
absolutely was a massive deal that we all went through. But I mean, we're so out of touch with, I mean, the problem with America right now is that, you have a mass shooting and it's like, well, thoughts and prayers, and I mean, like, all right. And then the next day you kind of wake up and it's kind of good. It's
Thoughts and
done.
prayers again.
Until the next one.
No, it's done. I mean, because it's so frequent that's happening that you can't, you're so desensitized, right?
Yeah.
You can't have that reaction like 1999 in Columbine, because in 1999, we'd never seen anything like that. That was impossible.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden this mass thing shows up and it's like, oh my gosh, like that shell shocked America, for months. And now it's like, well, there's a mass shooting. It's like, oh,
It's become normalized.
it has. And so, so I think so again, like sharing that message about China is always providing that nuance. And people say, like, what about free speech, right? Like you can't go out and say that, like, the president, what's so great about America is that I can go out and say, Joe Biden's an asshole. I can go out and say that and no one's going to give me any beef about that. And I'm like, yeah, but it's also, I said, you're definitely right about that. Okay. But there's kind of two things on that. Number one, great, you get to say that. What does it do? Doesn't do anything. Okay, maybe you release some personal steam. What does it accomplish? It accomplishes nothing. The second thing is that in China and in Asian societies in general, right, we have the system of meritocracy and respect, right? Asians are very different than that. I mean, I remember I saw a bumper. I took a photo. It was a car, and it says, like, Donald Trump is a pussy, and it had it, I mean, plastered at the full size of his back windshield. And I took a photo of it to show in a video, and I'm just like, yeah, this is America. This is like, you have the right to do that. I guarantee you, Chinese people are not going to look at that and be like, wow, I really wish I had that freedom.
Yeah, they're not going to envy that.
They're not going to envy that. They're going to be like, wow, that's pretty sad of you. They're almost going to look negative on you. Kind of like, wow, that's really sad that, like, that's what you want to do with your car.
But the flip side of that is, I think it's more about what that represents than literally saying Donald Trump's a pussy or Joe Biden's an asshole. I think to the American spirit, it's about, well, it's what that ability to do that represents as a whole in terms of
you're spot on.
freedom of
Justin.
speech, right?
You're spot on with that, right? And that is the American thing. And again, it's the same thing with the pandemic, right? I mean, look at, like, for example, in Asia, everybody wore face masks, right? It's just not a big deal, right? That you just get on with it. In America, it was a political thing. Right, the left was all wearing face masks. The right was saying, "You can't make me wear a face mask. This is a political statement." It's just a really interesting thing. But I mean, as far as, I mean, I think we just have so many misconceptions.
Yeah,
and many people are just like, man, I wish Chinese people would have the right to vote. If Chinese people could vote for their president, it would be so much better. Here's the interesting thing: I've spoken to Chinese people, and one of the things that they've said is they say, voting for your president is that's a huge responsibility. How much time, Cyrus, are you spending, like, analyzing the presidential candidates, studying what the policies they're going to do, really understanding, the Democrats and Republicans to really make a very informed decision? I'm like, that's a great question. The vast majority of people don't spend any time, right? We vote based on emotions or kind of historical, like, hey, we're Republican, you vote Republican. Hey, we're Democrat, you vote Democrat.
Or who debates better? Like, who wins the debates?
Or who wins the debates? It's based on emotion.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing where, like, people look at Donald Trump, it's like, well, how could Donald Trump get elected? He has no political experience because he's very good at talking. It's the same reason. Look at Barack.
He killed it at those debates,
right? But look at Barack Obama, right? He was a phenomenal public speaker. He had no political experience, right? He was a senator for 4 years and then he became president. Mm-hmm. But the thing was I remember I was at Florida State University, and I remember what he did is he opened up the I think it was the 2004 Democratic National Convention. He was like,
when he first got on.
Remember when he first got on stage, he gave this phenomenal public speech. But all of a sudden, and I remember I went to school the next day and I was taking like a civics class, and he goes, "Did you guys see that speech last night?" Barack Obama's going to be our next president.
Yeah, I remember that vividly.
That?
Yeah,
But he gave this incredible speech that just captivated America. He's so well spoken, and it's your ability to control a crowd, your ability to gain that attention, and if you can do that in America, you can be president.
Oh yeah, you can get get anywhere.
You can get anywhere.
And the art of storytelling.
It's the art of storytelling, and that's how Barack got there. But it's also how Donald got there, and it is very. Donald Trump becoming president was very. It's exactly what America needed, needed and wanted, because that is representative of a large part of he won the election. He beat Hillary. On paper, there was no way that he should have beat Hillary. Do you guys remember that leading up to that election? No one thought he had a chance. Yeah. It was basically like, all right, let's get our.
He was seen as a joke. No one took him seriously.
Even until the election day.
Yeah.
Everyone's like, well, this is going to be history made. Hillary Clinton, first woman president. Get your pantsuits ready, ladies. Like Hillary Clinton's coming, and then all of a sudden it's like the votes are coming in, and
I think that's typical of a lot of societies. You have blind spots as a whole, as a society as a whole. You have blind spots because. We in the context of our conversation, we talk so much about media, right?
Yeah.
And how, Western media really controls pretty much like 80% of the media signal that you're receiving, even though they represent maybe 20% of the world population. I don't know what the exact number is. But it's these blind spots in terms of the information you get, right? And obviously it goes through many filters because we self-filter in terms of the information we cherry pick and want to listen to. That's a self-filter. But even just as a whole, in terms of the information that's out there, we don't realize it's like the tip of the iceberg. There's a whole base of that iceberg of information and perspective that most of us, including us, like everyone, we don't usually get.
Yeah.
And that's just the reality of kind of like the world we live in.
Yeah.
And so we have these blind spots where we don't take things seriously, but the reality of the situation is it couldn't be more opposite.
Yeah. And I think for all of us is just trying to be a little bit more informed, trying to see the other side. And that's why I always love having chats with, the left and the right in America. I'm a very big believer that there is always a path to working together. And I'll never give up on that hope. Even US and China, like I said, when I started the channel 3 years ago, I'm like, I really want to make a better influence. And if we look back, here we are 3 years later, U.S.-China relations, let's be honest, it hasn't improved. It's gotten worse. Let's just be honest. Let's call a spade a spade. But that doesn't stop me from having that dream and that vision that there is a way for us to work together. And for me, it's like there has to be a way for us to work together because there is no other option, right? There is no option to decouple. There is no option of us not working together. We're the two biggest economies in the world. We're looking at things like climate change and bigger issue things. China's a permanent member of the UN Security Council. They're going to have their seat at the table. Yeah. You have to find a way to work with China. Yes, it's going to be different. There's certain things about China that's very different, but it's also, that's what I'm hoping to do on this trip is provide a little bit of that nuance as well, where, we have this perception in America that here's 1.4 billion people every day just wishing they could vote for a president, every day wishing they had democracy. No, you know what they're wishing for? They're wishing for the same things that millions of Americans are. A good job, a better life, a stable life, that my kids can do better, that my kids can have a better future than I did. Yeah. So again, when my neighbor was just like, what about China? I don't even know if they're going to be able to feed their people. Dude, I took my kids to Subway for $32.
I don't even know if I can feed
my kids for, it's like, come on, bro. Geez, I'm like, it's Subway, it's like, let's focus on the issues at home. You go, you know what I mean? Let's really, focus on these issues. You know?
I think we all need to be we all need to stop being so obsessed with the other side. And whether you're Chinese, we should focus on our own internal issues here, right? And whether you're American or from any other country, focus on your own internal. We get so obsessed with these things that we really have no control over. It's like it's almost silly in terms of it's like become entertainment for us now in terms of to watch.
But don't forget, it's especially it's an American thing. It's more so than other countries. Yeah, of course. America's the world police. You know what I mean? Quote unquote.
Yeah.
Right. So
I don't know. It just feels like it's easy to say, and obviously it's true. We need to come together. And in order to come together with two such diametrically opposed systems, Like there needs to be some sort of compromise, right?
Yeah,
and that's that's the strange thing I think of it all is that like democracy is like kind of built on compromise, right? A democracy is built on like a diversity of opinions, and people being able to express themselves, and innately within that, if you have such diverse opinions, compromises need to be made to reach any sort of decision and move forward. Yet what you see with like foreign policy is that it seems like zero sum. There is no compromising.
It very much is zero sum, and it's always the problem I find with the U.S. and our policies is that it's always my way or the highway, and I think that's one of the things. For example, when we look at Africa as a continent, and we look at one of the things that why has China excelled so well in Africa is that there's 54 countries in Africa, and China tends to treat every country individually. Whenever a country comes to Africa, let's just say it's the country of Chad, and the president of Chad comes to China. Well, they roll out the red carpet exactly the same way that they would roll it out for if Joe Biden came from the U.S. I mean, like if you're no matter if you're the United States or if you're a very small country, you have a very grand welcoming when you're an official diplomat coming to Beijing. We tend to China tends to treat you very, very respectfully. And that's the issue is that at our, Joe Biden led the U.S. Africa summit or whatever it was, the summit for Africa. And basically it's kind of like, well, Africa needs to do this and Africa needs to do that. Africa needs to do this. And that really pissed off the Africans because every one of them is like, well, we're 54 different countries. We don't need this. We need Nigeria needs this, Mozambique needs this. We all have different needs and wants, and China tends to listen a little bit better. So again, I make a lot of those videos is more like, hey, this is where we can learn and improve because kind of typical American arrogance, we kind of come in and just broad stroke like, let me show you what you should do in Africa. Like, this is what you need. And meanwhile, China, a lot with its Belt and Road, the Belt and Road Initiative is very fascinating because it's not China coming into these countries saying, "Hey, we want to build you a bridge." It's the opposite. The company, it's recipient driven. The recipient countries are going to China saying, "Hey, we want to build this bridge."
Well, they're like applying. Almost.
They're applying, right? And it's like, "Hey, this is what it's going to cost, but this is the economic benefit. We'll give you this in exchange for that." And that's how China's making these deals. Again, I'll be the first to say that China's not perfect and that there are legitimate issues in this country. But again, it's very hard for me as an American to criticize a lot of these things when I see the U.S. doing the exact same thing. And that is kind of where I'm at there.
Well, the hypocrisy is pretty obvious.
We talk about human rights. There's massive human rights violations in the United States all the time. It's ridiculous. So, and I think that's where, we really have to, the best thing that the United States can do is be that shining example to the world, but we're not. Just these beating of these war drums. We talked about Taiwan. Remember, this whole thing of like, there's going to be a Chinese invasion by 2025. 2025 is the big deal. Where did that number come from? It never came from a Chinese official. Never came from China. It came from a U.S. Army, a U.S. military general who said, well, in my gut feeling, I feel that China's going to invade by 2025.
Well, that timeline, that prediction has changed over the years.
Yeah, now it's like 2027 or now.
Well, before 2025, it was even earlier, I think, like decades ago.
But the problem is that, so I said, well, great. So now we're making foreign policy decisions based on one guy's gut feeling. And the thing is the interesting thing about that is the timing. And this is, again, going back to how the U.S. operates is that was coming up, it was like a couple weeks before the budget had passed for the federal government. And all of a sudden, like as soon as he said, okay, we're going to be with war in China, China's going to invade Taiwan by 2025, all of a sudden, boom, we're going to allocate more money now towards the budget, towards the military. Now our military spending is over $1 trillion a year. So, you can kind of see him almost thinking like, hey, I need to increase the budget here a little bit. Let me just kind of throw out this 2025 date. Now we got more funds allocated there, a little bit of urgency. That's unfortunate. That's the system. That's the system in America.
Well, this reminds me of something that our last guest said on the show, which was he was a professor of politics here in China, Joseph Gregory Mahoney, and he was saying that the American intelligence agencies and the military-industrial complex are really the only part of the American system that really deal with long-term planning. because the entire rest of the political system changes every 4 years.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. And and I had an insight from somebody that had a very close connection to the foreign policy in the United States, and basically said one of the issues that you have as well is that people that are working on foreign policy between U.S. and China, that are working inside the United States government, they're paid the most because that's the most important job, right? Is that's the most important relationship is U.S.-China. So he said you have a lot of issues of people that are, for example, that have experience on U.S.-Mexico, but they're kind of like, well, I want to make more money. So, can I apply for that job for China? And so you have a lot of times where people are necessarily they're being appointed into roles that they don't really have a lot of credentials for. I mean, like, for example, if we have a United States ambassador to China, I mean, this guy's got to be fluent in Mandarin. I mean, it has to be. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of Mandarin speakers inside the United States government. But I mean, you got to get somebody that's switched on and really understands the language and really understands that culture. I mean, we cannot have somebody that does not. I mean, how do you be an ambassador to a country and not speak that language?
We have been talking, but I want to understand, like, what's your outlook for the future? Like, realistically, as a human being, as a parent, what's your outlook for the future? Because, like, does it feel, and I've said this before in a previous episode, like, does it feel like the work you're doing is just throwing a snowball into a building fire,
Right.
Given, like, what Howie was alluding to earlier in our conversation, this massive uphill battle you have with what you're trying to accomplish. How do you see this playing out in the next few years? Like, what's your optimism level? What's your pessimism level? Where do you think how this all is going to unfold for you?
Unfortunately, I would say that I really feel the United States is moving towards a conflict. I mean, if I'm going to be very brutally honest here, and that's why I have more urgency to do the work that I do and to try my best to educate people and just try to provide that nuance and a little bit more perspective, that we're not looking at China as this, oh my God, China's trying to destroy the United States. China's not. China does not have that intention to. China, again, has a plethora of problems that they have to deal with inside this country that's going to keep them very busy over the next 10 to 20 years. But I mean, I do feel that, I think that common sense will prevail for in situations, for example, like, are we going to go to a hot war with China? The only scenario that would certainly involve Taiwan. But the issue is that, this would be devastation on a global scale. Yeah. I mean, there's the economic progress over the last 50 years for the world, gone out the window. And I mean, that would send all of these economies into a massive, massive recession, including our own. And the issue is I mean, you look at the Russian sanctions. Okay, the Russian sanctions were specifically designed to allow Russia to still export oil. Okay, that's really important to understand, because the problem is if you completely cut them off 100%, that would have caused a global recession. Okay, even for the United States. So I mean, you already look at how screwed Europe is with their access to energy. Germany's in a massive energy crisis. They've already officially entered in recession. So the Russian sanctions were basically designed to put pressure, but I mean, we're still allowing Russia to function essentially.
Yeah, not break the system.
We're not breaking. We're not 100. I mean, because if we 100% did it, then it would have been a trade embargo.
So that's an example where common sense prevailed.
That's an example where it's we're basically, we had to make a response to Russia, right? Like, we had to, like, what Putin did is wrong. I mean, he invaded, there's been a large conflict there, but I mean, you can certainly make the argument that the United States provoked him, with NATO expansion and things like that. But at the end of the day, I mean, what he did and what he has been doing is wrong. I mean, he's been bombing civilian areas. I mean, there's a lot of things that he's done that has just been horrible. But at the end of the day, you cannot cut Russia off. Like, it just shows you how connected our global economy is, because Russia has so much control of that oil and gas that it just would devastate. It would have completely devastated Europe, and that's just something the United States couldn't have happen.
And the scale's greater here,
and the scale's greater between U.S. and China, right? Yeah. So again, I think that's the same reason why I don't feel like is China going to all of a sudden one day wake up and all of a sudden they're going to start bombing Taiwan and we're going to destroy all the microchips? No way. Like, China loses in that scenario as well. the U.S. economy, all of the economies would be really screwed. So I think what happens is that my prediction is that there's going to be a lot more of increased tensions. But at the end of the day, I think both the U.S. and China understand that, they cannot go to war. They cannot go to a hot war because it would just be, our two countries go to war. I mean, that's the end of the world as we know it. Remember when Nancy Pelosi, flew to Taiwan?
Yeah.
And I think, I saw on the Chinese side, right, there was a lot of Chinese nationals who were like, oh, I wish that our fighter just should have taken down that plane and just sent a message.
There was a lot of that going on.
And I'm like, geez, that would have been a disaster, right? Like, you can't take down Nancy Pelosi's plane. That's just beyond stupid. But China's not stupid. They're not going to do that, right? I mean, that is a very outraged citizen that is just. And again, you could find the same outraged citizen where people, in America are saying, "Oh, I'll just bomb China and just send them a message." Again, the United States is not going to do that. So, there's going to be a lot of talk and
Posturing.
stuff, posturing. but at the end of the day, both sides, I think, are too smart and realize what's at stake here. Yeah. So it's kind of this balancing act that we're going through right now. But again, like both sides are not stupid, right? You have these two generals on these two warships in the middle of the Taiwan Strait, pretty darn close to each other, in fairness. And it's like, but they're not stupid. They're not going to open fire on that. But I'm sure that you might have some, Chinese netizens who are saying, you know what, we should have just taken a shot at them.
Oh,
just saying,
for sure.
Right? Just like take down that ship and be like, this is Taiwan Strait. This is our area. What the hell are you doing on our side of the world? But, China's leadership's, they're not stupid. That's the thing that people don't really understand in America is that, the high people that are in the Communist Party, these are very smart people. Yeah. I mean, one of the guys that is in the upper five, right? Like Xi Jinping's kind of upper cabinet, if you will. I mean, he spent the summer of 1988 traveling all through the United States, visiting universities, and he wrote a whole book about America and the universities and studying democracy. I mean, he speaks phenomenal English. I mean, this guy is very well educated. I mean, it's incredible because when you look at it on the counterpart, right? I mean, you have obviously American officials are not. I mean, they don't know China at all. I mean, none of them speak Chinese. None of them know that. A lot of
them never even been here before.
None of them ever been here. So all of a sudden, like you look at the Chinese counterparts. I mean, like this guy. I mean, he is. Pardon me, I don't know his name, but I mean, it's incredible. Like, and again,
a lot of the top officials here have spent a lot of time in the States. Many of them studying in the States.
Many of them studying in the States. I think there was some statistic that I saw of something in like the standing committee, like over 50% had been educated in the United States or abroad at some point. So it's I mean, China's very strategic where they're learning and this is where when we're looking at our American politicians where we need to be a little bit more strategic. I'm American. I mean, I want America to do good. I mean, but it's like. So let's analyze it. Why are people choosing China? Things like that. So, anyways, that's the end of the question. Is I feel a little bit pessimistic. I'm using that as a motivation to keep going, and I do at the back of my mind, I do realize that I think both sides, U.S. and China, are smart enough to realize that they can't get involved in something like a war. I mean, it's just it would be.
God, I hope you're right.
It'd be the end of civilization.
I really hope you're right.
It can. I mean. It'd be awful. It'd be the end of the world. To be honest.
I mean, but I'm coming from my own personal kind of like I don't know. I feel like through the years, my faith in humanity I'll put it this way, has not improved. Okay, and so I really hope you're right for all our sakes.
Absolutely. Well, I think one of the things you'll note about me is I'm a very positive person.
Yes.
I'm always going to look on I'm always this. This glass is actually half.
Well, it's actually full empty right now because you need another. No,
I'm good.
You're good? Okay.
Yeah, I'm good. But I appreciate it. No, guys, thank you so much for having me on the show today.
Thank you for coming.
It was so it's so serendipitous for me to be back in China. And Justin, shout out to you, buddy. I mean, you sent me a message like 24 hours ago, and you're like, let's make it happen. And
I saw you post last minute, you're coming here. I'm like, oh, yeah, you're coming. Okay.
And, well, the funny thing, I'm like, if the only way that I can do it is I got to see you first. Like, I got to just come right in. Like, I'm not even checked into my hotel. I'm going to bring the suitcases. Let's just bang it out. Let's get the podcast out. So, guys, thank you so much for being here. And guys, why don't you just tell everybody how they can find your podcast? Because we're going to put this on the YouTube channel. But how do they subscribe? Give a little shout out to the fans and
Yeah, well, we're pretty much on any major podcast platform you can find, Spotify, Apple, any of the other ones, Google Podcasts, whatever podcast app you use, will be on there. In China, we're on Xiaoyuzhou, Himalaya, Wangyi.
Perfect.
Yeah, and we have a little YouTube channel, but it's not really our main thing. We're mostly an audio platform. Yeah.
Fantastic. So we're going to put we're going to put the links to everything, right? We'll put all the links to the podcast, to the YouTube channel.
Vice versa, everything.
We'll put that in the description. So guys, Justin, Howie, thank you guys so much. It's so fun to come here, have a couple drinks with you guys, and be here in Shanghai. You have a beautiful studio.
Thank you.
That is in the heart of like the the downtown of Shanghai, but in kind of the old alleyways.
Yeah, it's a wonderful little neighborhood.
It's a beautiful.
You should check out some of the restaurants out there when you walk if you're hungry, because I know you haven't eaten yet.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to be grubbing it up in China for sure.
Thank you so much for everything you've done, not only for me, but just the content you make.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for making the time to come here on our podcast. I know you have a tight schedule. But man, thank you. I think you're just a wonderful human being, and everything you do, I support. So
thank you, man.
Thanks, man.
Means a lot. I'm so glad we could spend some time together.
Yeah, it was awesome.
All right, thanks, guys.
All right, that was Cyrus. I'm Justin.
And I'm Howie.
All right, be good and be well. Peace.
Peace.
There is a sad